What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another edition of SSPN Recaps. And Ethan, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of news, there's a lot of narratives, there's a lot of internet talk going on in the Spurs world. So I think it's good that we can come and kind of debrief today over what was really only a 1-1 weekend. So it
Yeah.
doesn't seem too bad on the record books. But when you combine the 40 point loss from last night against the Los Angeles Clippers, um, there's a lot of talking right now on the
Mm.
interwebs.
Yeah, I think Spurs Twitter and a lot of the fans and a lot of the haters out there had a nice weekend, Jude, on the internet. And here it is, Monday evening. I guess we'll post this tonight or tomorrow morning, Tuesday. And SSPN is going to do what it does best and kind of bring everybody back a little bit, no matter where you are on the spectrum, whether it be too high or too low. We try and bring everybody right back to happy medium, which is usually reality.
Yep. You gotta. I feel like coming onto the show tonight, Ethan. I feel like I'm just like calm,
Calm, yes,
calm,
it's a great way of putting it. That should be the theme for SSPN moving forward in this
just in
season.
general.
Just calm, yeah, just
Yes,
calm. Take
I
it as
like
it
that.
comes,
I like that. So that's the disclaimer I think that we can probably start today's episode with is there might be a lot of critical stuff that we talk about in
for sure.
today's SSPN recaps. But it's the third game of the season, guys. And I'm not trying to be that guy to be like, oh, you shouldn't worry about anything. You shouldn't, be concerned about struggles or anything like that. But once again. It's the third game of the season. As we mentioned in our last content, I guess you could say that we did was last Wednesday in the live after the season opener against the Mavericks. You kind of mentioned how you're not really going to have anything definitive until Christmas. I just agreed with that sentiment. But at the same time, we do have to react to what we're seeing and be honest about it. And obviously, last night was very ugly. I don't really think there's too much that we can really break down or take away from that, Ethan. But the structure for today's episode that I did have did start with the first two games. So I figured let's start with the Clippers game. Not like
Okay.
right now, this second, but just in general, because there's not really too much to break down there other than we just got our butt kicked.
Mm.
And then we can go into the Rockets game where there was a lot more to kind of dissect and really take away from. And then afterwards, Ethan, there were three kind of topics that I had. And first was just to talk about the offense and the struggles therein that we've been seeing, and some positives as well. And then also to talk about the rotations, not necessarily saying to change anything, but just because that's a big topic of conversation right now. And even me
Mm.
watching the games, it's something I want to talk about, with just some of the stuff that we've been seeing. And then the last thing I had, I'll kind of keep as a surprise, but there's a
Mm.
certain role player that I think you already know who I'm probably talking about that has really made an impact and has been a bright spot for us. But we'll save that all for later. Let's just talk about what we witnessed last night, Ethan. 83 to 123, I think, is what ended up being the final score for that Clippers game. Devin Vassell was the leading scorer with 14 points. Um, and yeah, that's about all I have to say about it. Because it's like we didn't get him the ball enough. He's kind of been, the key 20-point guy for us in the three games that we've seen this season. And then as well, what we saw from him in the preseason and the contract that he got going into this season. It all really ties into last year as well, because we only got 40 games then. Obviously, Devin has been kind of the initiator for us offensively. I don't
Mhm.
want to dismiss Wembenyama because obviously he's the golden goose, if you will, and the emphasis is getting him the ball as well too. But he's going to have some adjustments. We even saw in the Rockets game, not to jump all over the place here, but we even saw in the Rockets game that it took him a little bit to get going. Now he showed up in the clutch, and that's what matters. But kind of the steadiness of this season has been Devin Vassell, and I think that's going to be a theme throughout this season. So when you're not able to get him going, and then you combine that with turnovers, miscommunications on offense and defense, you're going to be down 30 for most of the game,
Yeah,
which is what happened.
it was definitely a rough one to watch, Jude. I mean, I watched the first half, um, the entire way through, and then kind of watched the highlights for the second half. Like I was kind of in and out of the game because it was a runaway in favor of the Clippers, and I really think our guys, and this is not an excuse. I mean, we have to be more mature than this and be better prepared than this, but they were really caught off guard um, by how aggressive the Clippers came out to play. And it's rare that we see a fully healthy Clippers team, and that's what this was. Paul
Yeah.
George, Kawhi Leonard, Russell Westbrook, Zubats, and their array of depth wings that are all defensive specialists and 3-point specialists. Like they were swarming our guys and pressuring Sohan and Devin early, and those are, as everyone knows, our primary ball handlers and playmakers. So they just couldn't find any openings. It felt like they were caught. Like I think we were texting back and forth, and you said they look like deer in headlights right now. And I think that's just the most accurate representation of our body language and why our offense looked so, it was just a complete disarray the entire time. And Devin
Yeah.
was a bright spot in that he had 6 of 10. He was aggressive a couple times in the first half. He tried to get our momentum going. He had a couple and ones, a couple tough jelly layups through contact
Yep.
on
Yep.
Kawhi and Zubats. And I thought maybe we can get a run going from here, but it just never worked out. And then on top of it, we were hitting back iron a lot. And again,
Mm-hmm.
not an excuse, but it just felt like our shots were all off collectively, only 33% from three, where they were 38%. And then just the cherry on top, Jude, something that no team can overcome is the turnovers, like you said, 25. And like I gave the Clippers credit defensively, but at the same time, there were just a lot of dumb mistakes, a lot of bad passes, poorly timed passes, and just a lack of deliberation with our decision making, and that's from top to bottom. I was hoping maybe Trey would have a bigger impact coming in, and we'll get into his impact later on in the show. But his impact was not felt as strongly I felt in this Clippers game. Like he came in, and it was just the same usual bad basketball that we saw from the starters.
Yeah, I echo everything you said. What I had written down for that game was they punched us in the mouth, like
Mm-hmm.
you said, to open with the way that they played us, and
Yep.
then they bullied us. Everybody,
Yes.
Zubox inside, Kawhi and PG. We're taking advantage. Just some stuff that pops into my mind. Sohan still getting caught behind screens, and that's the thing with Trey too. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to dump too much. He jumped too far ahead here, but a lot of our guys were getting beat. In one-on-one situations with Kawhi and PG, or just them moving in the offense. Which, like you said, it's not necessarily. We don't want to make excuses, but it does kind of tie into kind of the Luka Kyrie thing that we talked about after the Mavs. Like we said, we saw the opening season press conference. We even said it, in our season preview and everything. Like the mentality is different this year, so it's not like we're just going to be like, oh, they're young, but at the same time, the guys that they're getting beat against in those situations are better than them as of right now. But still, I would still like to see them play better.
Mm-hmm.
In especially than the way that they played last night against those guys. Whenever it comes to guarding, Kawhi and PG on defense and maybe getting caught up in screens in their offense. But on top of that, after they punched us in the mouth and did whatever they wanted
Mm-hmm.
to, bullying us physically on offense and defense, I'd say. Really, that just allowed them to beat us down mentally and physically. You could see
Mm-hmm.
the frustration from everybody on the court. Really, the most, hate to call him out, but I mean, it's just the truth. Like last night, the most frustration I saw was definitely from Jeremy. I saw his hands up like this so many times, and a lot of that did have to do with miscommunications. Sometimes there were passes that he made that it seemed like somebody else should have been there, but sometimes it was the other way around. And he kind of still had that same reaction. And we can sit here and be super critical about it, Ethan. And I'm not saying that that's something I don't want to see improve, because that is something I want to see improve. But at the same time, he's 20 years old in this situation, playing point guard for the first time. So it
Mm-hmm.
does make a little bit of sense. But going back to the Clippers game, because of them beating us mentally and physically, they they made us frustrated and discouraged, and that's how they beat us mentally and physically. And we
Mm-hmm.
just could not bounce back. This was a first round KO, and just like there was no ref to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
They were just hammer fisting us for 3 quarters. like
Pretty
there was
much.
yeah, there was nobody pulling them off saying it's over. We just had to deal with it, and we did not have a response. So that was probably the most disappointing thing of this game. But at the same time, um, we'll see on Tuesday. We'll see tomorrow night on TNT without Devin Booker and Bradley Beal. Probably on Thursday they're going to have to play Devin. But at least tomorrow night it should just be KD and Nurkic and kind of the rest of the Suns roster. We'll see how they bounce back because it is a new team, and it is really like one of the things that I know it's a lot of returning players, but as you and I, in our preseason uh, kind of preview predictions, there was some episode, I can't remember exactly which one, we were kind of talking about how, just the theme that we've already kind of been talking about in this one, less excuses
Hmm.
whenever it came to this season. And while that is definitely still like there's still a higher standard, I think even if you were to look at just the first 10 minutes of this in comparison to how we talked about the team last year, if you went and watched some of our videos, it's even different. But at the same time, um, I'm losing my train of thought here, Ethan. Remind me where I was at.
You were saying there's no excuses, but we were talking earlier in the season that like, and
This
that's
is
kind of
where I
where
was
you.
getting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Mhm.
you. You got me there. This lineup and regardless of the point Sohan thing, that's not even what I'm talking about. Like last year, Jeremy, Keldon, Devin, and Zach didn't even play together that much. Like, I forget,
Mhm.
you sent me a stat like after we had that conversation where it was like they had only played 38 minutes together or
Yeah.
something last season. It was a lot less than we expected. So the point that I'm getting to here is they are playing together for the first time, and there's going to be. I mean, when you take in that context, it, it makes last night a little bit less surprising, not
Mhm.
excusable whatsoever. That's not what I'm saying. But if, like, for example, if tomorrow night they come out and look a lot better, they might have just it might have just been inevitable that they were going to have one of these games early in the season when you consider the context. Does that make sense?
For sure. First away game. The starting lineup doesn't have much experience together. It's against a really stacked, solid Clippers team. And Wemby's a rookie, and like you said, not a lot of experience between the rest of the guys. They're just caught off guard. But the one last thing I will want to hit on, Jude, on top of what you just said, as far as the no excuses thing, just to address it, Jeremy cannot have a 0 point game ever. If he's gonna be the starting point guard, you cannot score 0 points. And Keldon Johnson can't be 1 for 9. Um, he 1 for 5 from 3 point land. Cumulatively, the starting unit only hit 3 3 pointers. That's not going to work. And Zach Lowe talked about today on NBA Today. He claims that Wemby doesn't have enough shooting around him in that starting unit. I disagree. I think Zach's a capable shooter. I think Keldon and Devin are capable shooters as well as Wemby. And Sohan at time from time, he's not a 3 point shooter. We know that, but they can't have a game like this where they go only three total threes made in one game. That's just not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree on that front and on the front where you talked about their stat line. It's not just about their stat line, but like Sohan only took 2 shots,
Mm-hmm.
and it's because, like I said, they punched us in
Frustrated.
the mouth, they bullied us, and then they beat us up mentally and physically, and they basically made us quit. Like, I mean, I
No,
hate to
you're right.
say that, but that's what happened. And I'm not gonna say that if I was in the same shoes, I might do the same thing. To be
Yeah,
completely honest with you, like
it's
especially of getting
completely understandable.
harassed by Kawhi and PG,
Yeah,
and Russ. And that's another thing we'll get into. But it was just tough, man.
yeah. Pop addressed it
It's
too in
not
his
an
post.
excuse. It's not an
No,
excuse that can't happen with the Jeremy's got to take more shots than that in general. You can't just completely give up. And Keldon shot bad, but here's the other thing. Like when you mentioned the Zach Lowe thing, and he's talking about Wembanyama and he needs more shooting. Like I said, this goes back to the 3 games thing. But more importantly, man, I did a deep dive today. I watched the Rockets game that I didn't get to watch live. And there's also this site. I retweeted it on the SSPN on YT account. Y'all should go check it out. Um, I'm forgetting the name of it. I'm so bad. But y'all go to the at SSPN on YT, follow us. It's the first retweet, and there's a site that came out. It's something.fans. And I think it's bucketlist.fans. And they have tape for every statistical category from NBA advanced stats. And I went and watched a lot of Spurs today. I went and watched a lot of assists. I went and watched every shot that Jeremy, Trey, and Keldon have taken this season. I watched a lot of Zach's assists as well. Jeremy's and Trey's too. There was a lot of stuff. I don't I don't know if shooting is the issue. I think we're just completely discombobulated. Don't know how to play together right now. Um, it looked a little better with Trey out there at the end of the Rockets game, but last night, dude, in the Clippers game, Trey had the same amount of turnovers as Jeremy, and
Hmm.
and Russ took advantage of Trey every single time he was out there. And still, I'm not. Still, I would say overall, of course, Trey played point guard at Duke. He's been playing point guard his whole life. It's gonna look cleaner when he's out there. I'm not saying that, but like last night when I was watching, when you see, we opened this up talking about the interwebs and a lot of people talking, all of the people who are out there saying, like it's obvious we need to start Trey over Jeremy, you got to acknowledge those turnovers. You got to acknowledge when he gets taken advantage of on defense. You've got to acknowledge the wide open shooters and he misses them in the corner and throws it out of bounds. And that's not me saying, once again, as I just prefaced this, that's not me saying that I don't think that that's not me saying I think Jeremy is playing better than him playmaking wise, because I don't. But it's not like Trey's just this, we're going to put him in and it's just going to fix all of the problems offensively. From the first 3 games that I've seen, I just don't think that's the case. I think he's better at finding Wemby, which I think is
Hmm.
important for our offense. Um, but like you said with the deer in the headlights thing, we're doing way too much isolation.
Hmm.
Like it's weird the way that and I think it has to do probably with just the ramped up intensity of the regular season. I feel like that is in the if anything has shown itself in the first 3 games, Ethan, with the staggering difference of our offense in preseason versus the regular season, it's the ramped up defensive intensity of the regular season.
For
and,
sure.
and just reminded me, I mean, it's, to be honest with you, it's humbling me a little bit. I'm like, man, I really should not have been as optimistic. Not to say that there's still not potential, but I think as high as I was coming out of the preseason, it was like I shouldn't have done that. But at the same time, it's like with Wembenyama here, we're just like,
Yeah.
we're so excited. So I don't think it was too egregious, but at the same time, like I said, with what we've seen so far, it's a big reminder of that.
Most definitely. I agree with what you said about Trey. I think the Rockets game really got people excited about Trey, thinking, like you said, he could fix all the issues. And I love Trey Jones. If you're a regular of the show, you know how big of a fan I've been since we drafted him and since he played in that first summer league and in Austin. I think, like you said, he calms guys down. But it all comes back to what Pop said, I think, in preseason press conference, or maybe it was media day press conference, in terms of how he's going to use Wemby. And he was like, first few weeks, we're just going to let him go. Like, we're not going to have like a scheme for him. We're just going to let him get a feel for the game. And then we'll start kind of scheming and actually coaching. So right now, like you said, it's a lot of isolation. It's a lot of discombobulation. And part of that is probably because Pop doesn't call plays really for anybody right now, because he's letting them get a feel for each other. And they don't have one yet, clearly, because they haven't had enough experience or
No,
time together in that lineup. So it's going to be like this, I think, for at least a month or two, to be honest with you, where it just looks, I don't know, disconnected.
sloppy. Yeah,
Yeah, very
and
slow.
disconnected is almost a better word though, because when I think about, I've been thinking about a lot of basketball terms also, just in the wake of these 3 games and really last night and the Spurs offensive struggles, if you will, to start the season. And there's a couple terms. There's 2 terms that one I was coming in with that I knew pre-planned, but as you just said that, another one popped into my mind, and I get these from shout out to Dan Miller at San Marcos High School.
Mm.
He's who I do my basketball and brew podcast with. I produce that, so y'all go check that out if you haven't. But regardless, he coached at Laterno University, a D3 in Texas. Okay, and they really didn't have much history of winning. They had never been to an NCAA tournament. They had never won an NCAA tournament game. They had never won a conference championship, or if they had, it had been a really long time.
Hmm.
He came in and did all of those things, got them their first NCAA tournament win, got them 2 NCAA tournament appearances, and I believe a couple straight conference championships. And he has very good history as well, in Texas high school basketball, etc. And there's two terms that he uses for his teams that I think are applicable. And I know that's a different level, but I still think it's applicable to the Spurs. One is connectivity. As you just kind of mentioned, we feel disconnected. Connectivity is a term that he uses for all of his teams. If they want to accomplish their goals, they got to be connected. We don't feel connected right now. But here's the big one that I came in with before you even mentioned that: ball speed.
Mm,
Ball speed on offense, man. Like, we're not
that's very true.
our ball speed is so slow, and that's so unspurs like, and it's very different from the preseason. So we need to improve that, obviously, but I'm not enough of a basketball, I don't know what to say, guru or
Yeah,
knowledge.
we don't
No,
have the solution.
right. I don't have to say exactly. I'm just a podcaster. So it, I don't know how exactly. I mean, obviously, it's passing faster is the simple way to put it. But I think because of the situation, as you just alluded to, I don't know how quickly that's going to come, because I think we've got to be connected before we can have ball speed. Because if we just try to have ball speed, then we're going to have turnovers, which is already an issue.
Hmm. Hmm. Agreed. Agreed. The one thing I will say, ball speed connects to that we should do more often is throw the ball in full court to Wemby when he has someone pinned down underneath the basket. Still don't know why we don't do that. Trey's the only one that consistently throws it up to him.
Absolutely. And that's the one thing with the Trey thing that I do like. I really do see where people
Hmm.
are coming from there specifically.
Yeah.
I was rewatching the Rockets game today. This will get us into the Rockets game here. And there was literally a whole like segment. You know what I'm talking about? Sean Elliott's like, Devo, you missed him right here. And then there was another one where Sohan could have threw it up. And that does tie into kind of Devin's post game press conference against the Mavericks, where he said, we haven't been playing with guys who are 7'4",
Hmm.
so it's an adjustment and it's going to take time. Not an excuse, but it's something that. Here's the other context with that, Ethan, that I think people aren't taking into account. Last year, we programmed these guys to just go out and act like they're Michael Jordan. I know
Kind of.
that's an exaggeration, but we just told everybody, go take your shot. So now it's like almost a complete 180. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Anything concerning Victor Wembanyama and getting them the ball, I think we should just blanket statement. It's going to take time.
Yes.
It's things that have to be figured out. That's not an excuse, like you said. Like, yes, they're basketball players; they should know some of this stuff just inherently. But
They
it's
should be
just
more aware.
it's going to take time, and that's literally every player that's ever come into the NBA,
Yeah.
except for maybe LeBron James and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. It's like you said, it's going to take some time, unfortunately. But one thing I think we can do offensively that maybe doesn't need to take as much time is emphasizing getting Devin Vassell the basketball, whether that's him running off screens, whether that's him cutting to the basket, because we've seen his inside scoring in the first 3 games of the season. And I think that is something that has translated a little bit from preseason as well. One of the few things is he's really, I mean, that Mavericks game, he didn't even shoot that well from three, but he was able to get 24, 25 points, however much he had, because of his inside scoring. You mentioned the jelly layup that we did see a little bit of against the Clippers last night. Or we need him in pick and rolls as
Hmm.
well. Like, we just need him in some capacity, like to be involved in some part of the offense. I don't hate having him in catch and shoot situations, but I feel like that should be the lesser of all the other things that I talked about.
1000%. The only time I really want him to catch and shoot is in transition when he's the trailer and takes a three. Otherwise, I want him with the ball in some in some capacity because you're completely right. I mean, the Rockets game is a perfect example of what we want him to do. Like, as far as Dev Vassell moving forward, watch the Rockets game. That's what we
Yeah.
need every single time because they did emphasize getting him the ball in dribble handoff situations,
Yep.
coming off of screens. He created his own shot. He and Jalen Green were kind of going back and forth for a little bit there. And he had 25 points, 3 boards, and a couple assists. Like, he was terrific in that game.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the other thing, like when I talked about him in pick and roll situations more, I would like to see him taking it up a little bit more. because this like as we've said from the beginning, this Sohan lineup is not like, yes, we're calling him Sohan at point guard, but he is not. It's not traditional point guard responsibilities.
Mm.
Um, so I would like just his handle. It's night and day when you
Mhm.
watch, like especially today when I was on that website and you go look at Devin shots and then you look at Sohan's and you just see the difference in like how they look with the ball in their hands. I think that would help us in our creation ability a lot. And also Sohan on offense, dude, every shot he has taken, it's like it's either been a three or it's been in the paint.
Yeah,
And sometimes he forces it too much, which I that he needs to improve on that. But there's been a lot of good moments of him cutting to the basket and dunking on people. He
yeah,
already has multiple dunks on people this year, and we forget one was against Alper and Şengün, and then one was on Derek Lively. And so, I mean, those are two guys who had games against us in both of those
Mhm.
games. Um, so
Yeah. Only thing I'll say in defense of Jeremy in that situation, it is different from last year in the sense that now there's two guys in the paint. Rather than last year it was just Zach. So now
true.
there's less room for him to operate. So he's kind of forced out of the paint a little bit more and out of that dunker
That's a
spot.
very good point. But
So
we still have found him in those situations this year.
mhm.
Like so
Yeah.
and I think that Devin having the ball would open up those opportunities more. But with what you're saying is very true because at the end of the day, while I do like Jeremy driving to the basket, I would probably rather have Victor. Now that's a very good two options. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah. It's
but
kind of made it hard for everybody to drive, to be honest with you. And like as great
Keldon
as it
too.
is having, yeah, Zach and Wemby, two big physical presences as far as getting extra possessions, rebounds, and they're both skilled on the block. It's like suddenly we're playing old school basketball sometimes, and guys just there's no room. There's no room to operate as far as getting to the basket.
This is also Devin and Keldon's first time playing with two bigs. I didn't even realize that either.
It is. That's another complete learning curve. They've never had to do that.
Yeah.
And Zach last year was really he was a five, but he wasn't always getting it in the low block. He was like high post or a pick and pop guy. So the paint was
Yeah.
wide open for Keldon to barrel through. And now
And he
there's
was
like,
the only guy in the paint too, because
hmm
we were playing Jeremy at the four.
yep, exactly. Or Jeremy was cutting to the basket. So
Right.
now there's three guys that would technically four if you want to count Keldon that all prefer to
Yeah.
score on the inside. Wemby's kind of an in between guy, but
No, that definitely at least Zach, Jeremy,
Keldon.
and Keldon. And really when you look at the second half of that Rockets game, when Wembanyama's perimeter shot isn't working, we're gonna have to turn to the interior. So
Hmm.
that's four right there. But getting back to the Rockets a little bit, I'll give you some of my notes here. I had finishing quarters. That was one thing I had, which they did do at the end of the. It was kind of a little bit of a double take there, and what I mean is that in the second quarter they really right before halftime they let the Rockets go on a big run, which they didn't finish it well, and then they were able to pull out a run of their own and actually tied it. But you don't want to be in that situation in the first place. And that's a theme also that, I mean, all of last night was bad, but still in all of the games so far this season, that's something I've seen. Um, and then some other things I had written down, and this ties into some of the other stuff we've already talked about: lack of ball speed, movement, and awareness. Now, granted, I'm writing this down, and it's like, and I even wrote this down also. Devin said we didn't have we didn't have the best first half against the Rockets. He said that in the post game press conference. This first half against the Rockets, after watching the Clippers game, looks incredible.
Yeah. Anything in
He's
comparison.
right. He's right, but it's just so funny because I watched that last night and then watched this one, and I'm like, oh, Devin, you didn't even know.
He had no
Uh,
idea what was coming.
he had no idea. But that's why I have some of the. If it seems a little critical on some of these, it's because of that. I was still thinking how Devin was before seeing what Sunday was. Um, I wrote when we run plays, good things happen most of the time. We don't do it often, but when we do, it usually leads to a good look or a made shot.
Hmm.
Um, Too much isolation. We talked about that. This is another thing I had written down: indecisiveness and nonchalantness. And what I mean by that is that kind of ties into isolation and the deer in the headlights kind of thing that I was talking about. We get the ball and we don't know what to do with it. Um, and I think that ties in to once again just us not really running plays right now. Also, um, but still, if this is the situation, you can't just have the ball and then just stop like mid motion when other people are cutting, and then everybody's just like, okay, what do we do?
Mm.
We don't kind of have that constant motion, but the nonchalantness, that's the other thing. I feel like sometimes with our dribbles, this is a thing that unfortunately Jeremy sticks out a lot in my mind when I'm talking about this, but it's not just him. I mean, I've even seen this a little bit from Zach sometimes, and really the whole roster at times too. We're just not this. This is kind of ties into awareness, but there's so many passes so far this season, Ethan, that I've seen where we throw it to somebody and they're not looking, and then it's a turnover.
That's a common problem. Another common problem is throwing it to somebody like taking half a second too long and letting the defender like make a play on the ball. And we've
Yes.
gotten away with it a lot where we're like we rip it away, the defender's out of position now. So like, oh, Spurs get a three or something. It's like, oh, great play. It's like, no, it was actually a bad play. We just got away with it. And the Clippers took advantage of those, but the Rockets did not. I agree with everything that you were saying. The Rockets game was not pretty either. There were a lot of negatives to take away. I think what got us away with a win. The Rockets are also in the same situation as us. They're a younger team. They make mistakes. They had 9 more fouls than we did, and they missed half of their free throws. So if they had hit 5 more free throws, they immediately win. They missed 10. Um, and luckily for us, we were hitting shots. So, we were able to take advantage of those situations. Keldon had 20. Wemby came to play at the end of the game. He had 21. And Devin was consistently aggressive and looking for his shot. He had 25. So when those
Yeah.
three get 20, we're going to be in the games. But it's those other little mistakes, like you were talking about, that lack of connectivity and aggression and overall chemistry that makes these games close and almost let the Rockets come back and win.
Yeah. Yeah, and that even ties into like the way that game finished. It shouldn't have been as close as it was in
Mm-mm.
overtime, but we were able to on that last play kind of get lucky with Keldon running to the rim
Yep.
to get that dunk to close it out. What you just said there, the half second thing where it's like we're like half second too late. That's exactly what I meant when I
Mm-hmm.
was saying like nonchalantness. It's just we're not as intense as we should be on some, and I think that's caused by confusion.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing that I wanted to say. So that ties into kind of the whole scheme thing. So it's tough because some of it is out of their control. But when this is the situation,
There's no
it's
confidence in what they're doing. They don't
yeah,
know what they're doing.
exactly. And that's because of like what you said. We're figuring things out with Wembanyama. We don't really have a scheme, but it's like still, that's the situation. So you've got to be a little bit more intense. And it's like if we're gonna go free flowing, let's free flow hard. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And you know what? That's going to bring me into my next point about this game. Somebody that free flows harder and better than anybody, and I think this may be who you were alluding to earlier, is Chetty Osman.
Absolutely.
And he almost more so than Trey, and Trey was fantastic in the Rockets game. I felt he was really
He
connecting with
was.
Wemby, and he was a big proponent of why we were able to like get into overtime and then win in overtime. But Chetty Osman is so connected somehow. Even though he's the new guy, he feels the most connected with everybody, and the ball
It's
doesn't
because
doesn't
he's a glue
stop.
guy.
Yeah, there's no hesitancy in any of his decision making, and he's always ready to pull from three on catch and shoot opportunities. And he was even solid in the Clippers game, to be
I
honest
agree.
with you.
He was the only reason we were kind of in it at the beginning.
And I'm gonna make a hot take here, Jude. This is not gonna happen, so people don't yell at me in the comments. This isn't even remotely gonna happen.
I think I might
But
know what you're about to say. Wait.
some things that might help us fix the starting unit. Put Chetty Osman in the starting unit.
Dude, I almost texted you that last night when we were texting, but I'm like, it's 3 games. I don't want to say anything.
Yeah, that's
But I
yeah.
was, but and I don't want to advocate as we're gonna say that we like the idea of this. Me
Hmm.
and you are both gonna say this, but we're also
Yeah,
gonna say we're not advocating lineup changes
yeah, not yet.
whatsoever. But I had that thought pop into my mind last night, dude, because you think about the playmaking skill and you think about what they're trying to do with this. And then also, I mean, and I'm not going to get into that. All I'm going to say is Trey and Sohan on the bench would
Yes.
probably help a lot of issues there too. But still, I sent you a tweet earlier today. Pop literally said in the press conference before last night's game, like, it's like he's just reminding people, like, Jeremy Sohan at point guard is our 2023-2024 experiment. So, like I said in the Mavs game, I get where y'all are coming from. I really do. But this is what we're going to do. Like,
Hmm.
most likely, whether you like it or not, or
Yeah.
whether I like it or not. It's just what's happening. So, you got to, accept it. But it's a long term decision, though. That's the
Hmm.
other thing. And we're not winning the championship this year anyway. I know we want to win games with Wemby. I know we do. I want to. I don't want to get blown out by 40 against Kawhi. I don't. But
Hmm.
it I'm not. I don't think that Jeremy starting at point guard was the reason for that. Like,
No.
maybe we start a little bit better, but I think regardless of what the starting lineup is last night, we lose by at least 25.
1000% agreed. It comes back to what we said at the very beginning. The Clippers, fully healthy, are contenders, and they are just on paper and in real life way better than our team right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's another thing I wanted to talk about offensively, Ethan. And I feel like it's Zach did have 8 assists in that Houston game. That's another thing. But
Hmm.
it still kind of feels like, and I went back and watched all those assists, and not a lot of them were out of the post. A lot of them were at the top of the key, maybe at the elbow. But it
Hmm.
kind of feels like we've almost and tell me your thoughts on this. Maybe this is just me seeing things and creating it in my head and being wrong. But it feels like we've almost abandoned running our offense out of the post, where it felt like that was going to be the emphasis coming out of the preseason. And Jeremy even said it in his media day press conference.
Yeah, I still felt like he did it in the Rockets game with those 8 assists, but in the Clippers game specifically, I think it was very difficult. I think we tried it early, and it was just extremely difficult. One, Zubats is a physical presence like Zach, so he can get up into Zach and play along the perimeter. But they have so many great defenders. We're not catching them sleeping like we're catching the Rockets
Well,
sleeping.
yeah, that Clippers game too. It's like they
No,
just beat us. Like nothing was gonna work. What
we
was
tried
gonna?
it like 3 times in a row, and it was like steal Kawhi, steal Paul George, and then you got Batum and Covington. These are all like really solid defenders. So there was just no backdooring anybody in that Clippers
Yeah.
game. But I understand where you're coming from as far as getting the rock to the post and letting Zach maneuver. He does it from time to time, but it still felt more prevalent in the preseason. You're right. I don't know.
It just seemed like they were talking about it a lot. It seems like they're shell shocked in these
Hmm.
in these first 3 games to an extent, and
Well,
that goes back to the intensity. But
yeah, I was gonna say Pop talked about it a little bit. He was like, there's like a not a game plan, but like a point of emphasis going into every game. And as soon as things start going haywire, everyone's ready to abandon that point of
mm,
emphasis. And he was like, it's not a selfish thing. It's just suddenly you're down by 10, then 20, then 30. And it's like everyone kind of separates as far as their goals. And, they take it upon themselves to be too aggressive at times. They're like, I'm going to
yeah,
get us back into the game. Or I don't want to go. Let's say the post was the emphasis. I don't want to go there because it hasn't been working.
right,
Um, that's just bound to happen, especially with guys at this age.
yeah. But like I was saying, is even though Zach had 8 assists in that Houston game, it wasn't like we're dishing it to him.
Hmm.
He's facing up, and then we got people running around. Like when I was talking about how it was like eerily similar to Timmy,
Mm.
and the Mavs game. It's a little bit tougher to evaluate because Wembenyama, was kind of taken out of the game, and maybe you would have ran things, through him a little bit as well. Um, yeah, that's just something I'm gonna keep watching. I'd like to see that more, but we'll just have to see. That kind of ties into 3 games in the
Hmm.
season again. The miscommunications. What are your thoughts on that? Because we're seeing that on offense and we're seeing that on defense as well.
I think it's just a trust thing. Like we've repeatedly said, these guys don't know each other yet. As much as Devin and Kelton have played together, the rest of these guys collectively have not. Uh, Zach Collins is not the best interior defender. Wemby's new, so it's just bound to happen. We were hoping that this lengthy starting lineup would fix a lot of those problems, and at times it can, just because of their physical gifts. Um, but rotations and chemistry, that's one of the hardest things to kind of build, and it still hasn't been that long since these guys have started playing together.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned Zach there. You mentioned his interior defense because that's something that you and I were, at least I know I was for sure, like was a little bit higher on going into
Hmm.
this season. And that's the other thing I had written down. And even in this Houston game was, and this ties into really all of the games so far, offensive boards and physicality in the paint. Um, that's it hasn't looked as good as I've expected from
Hmm.
Zach so far.
I think he's physical and he's always going to be intense. He's just losing because these guys are so much bigger and stronger than he is. And I think he used to be bigger and stronger, but he thinned down a little bit or leaned out, probably as a protective maneuver for his foot and ankle. And he is quicker along the perimeter, but guys like Alper and Shangoon, they're just going to body Zach, unfortunately. There's not much he could do about it.
Yeah, and that's where it kind of just and we'll see how the season goes. I just hope we can see some improvement like we saw last year there.
He's
That
always up for the fight. I'll give him credit.
right.
He's never backing down.
No,
Like,
the reason he's got postered 3 times and
yeah,
people can say whatever they want about that, but like you're saying, there's is because he actually tries. Like I'm not questioning his
intensity.
or not even intensity or anything like that. It's just like I remember specifically even saying like he looked physically better. It even felt better. And once again, that's another example of preseason not being indicative of always translating. But at the same time, even physically, like he looked better. I mentioned that, and it hasn't translated so far. But as we're talking about this, I am remembering how last season it really he that interior defense, we saw him get better as the season
Hmm.
progressed. So hopefully we can start to see, maybe not immediately because it's not going to happen over one game. But when I say start to see, I mean, it'll probably be a lot longer. It's not probably going to be within like the next 2 weeks or something like that. But hopefully we can start to see we can see some similar progression as we saw last year when it comes to his interior defense. That gives me a little bit of hope as we're talking. But I'm sure there are a lot of people out there right now who feel like, I even have some friends who are like, man, he's just really getting bullied in the paint. Like, and this is our center, you know?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we have a fix for it right now.
Yeah.
Because as much as I like Charles Bassey, he hasn't been crazy good. I know he's only had like 10 minutes a game or something like that, but he hasn't been a fix either.
He's not, if you put him in the, I don't think there's
No,
go if you put him in the starting lineup,
it's
sure, maybe
worse.
sometimes he's going to be able to, you know, physically compete with guys that Zach can't, but then there's a whole nother list of problems, like you were
Yeah,
saying.
that's really Zach's only. That's his biggest flaw. The only glaring flaw is just physicality down low. Or I shouldn't say physicality, just being just being strong enough. Like he just
Yeah.
doesn't have the physical tools to compete down there.
Yeah, with some guys for sure. Because there'll
Some
probably be
guys.
some guy, right? Because there'll be some games where it changes. I don't want to be too critical there. That's not me saying that I want to trade Zach immediately. That's just me noticing that that's been a struggle
Hmm.
in the first 3 games. And the other thing that they might be thinking about down the line too is it's like this is him next to Wembenyama, and as Wembenyama gets better as the season progresses, as I was just kind of
Hmm.
alluding to, his job's probably going to get a lot easier.
Most definitely. It doesn't help Zach either. And this isn't about post defense, but it doesn't help when our perimeter defenders kind of let their man get a full head of steam at the rim.
That's so true, and
Like,
that's happened with a lot of guys.
I know you have Wembanyama back there who's going to fix a lot of problems and block shots, but you still have to slow guys down
Yeah,
and not let them get a line drive to the basket.
yeah, yeah. I've seen that a couple times from
Yeah.
a couple different guys, unfortunately.
Holistically, Jude, we should not have expected, even with the lineup change, we should not have expected us to go from last in defense to suddenly like top 10.
Yeah,
Like we're still probably bottom 10 by the
yeah.
end of this year, even with the lineup changes and the personnel that we brought in, like Chetty Osman.
Bro, you want to hear an example of how you want to hear a really funny stat about this team right now?
Let's hear it.
We're fourth in the league. It's 3 games. So that's
It's
the whole point.
3 games.
We're fourth in the league in assists.
Let's go.
Bro, but we shouldn't be. Like, we've played so ugly.
We were
Like,
so ugly.
that's why I just had to give an example of how, like, you could look at that. Oh, the Spurs are playing good. They're passing the ball good. No, they're not. But we're fourth. We're top 5 in the freaking league in assists right now, apparently.
Championship bound.
Anyways, the other, yes, I agree. The last thing I had written down here, and this is on the Rockets game, but this ties into the whole season. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we just have that intensity that we saw in the preseason. Like, I mean, we've seen some glimpses of it from a couple guys, but as a whole, we have had decreased in intensity on offense and on defense, and I think it's caused by confusion. Because when we don't know where to go or what to do, one person stops. It's like the Spider-Man meme. Like, everybody just starts pointing at each other. Like, nobody knows what to do.
Yeah, that's fair. That's definitely a fair assessment. And we're really playing completely differently. Like, I don't know what it is, but we looked way better the preseason. And maybe it was just competition. Maybe the other teams were
Yeah.
just like not into it as much, and suddenly, they cranked it up to 11, and we're just not prepared mentally or physically.
It's weird though, because it's like I see Steph in the preseason shooting the game-winning shot against the Kings before we play them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, I see other teams going hard and it not being like this 180, So
yeah.
I think it definitely, to some extent, it has to do with an increase of intensity for everybody, from preseason to regular season. And I know I'm using intensity a lot there. I was referring to, like, just the league as a whole right there. But when it comes to intensity for us, like I said, we're not cutting as hard. We're not in motion as much. And we're not, rotating as hard and
Mm,
in motion as much on defense, covering our guys. Like, and, as I'm talking about this, it really just ties into confusion, like mentally, like when the mental part of the game, when we're not sure where to go there, it just
yeah.
everything starts to sputter.
Couldn't have said it better myself, my friend. I mean, that's gonna be the theme for the next few weeks.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Ethan, we should have our special segment here. We kind of covered everything else, honestly.
Mhm.
It was a little bit jumbled, but I we think it needed to be, because it all kind of tied into each other. But Shetty Osman, as you mentioned earlier, that was who I wanted to talk about. And you talked about the connectivity. And we've seen his shooting, we've seen his physicality, we've seen his playmaking ability. Um, yeah, there's really not too much else to say there. But I guess give your final little blurb on Shetty for this episode, because I know you kind of already talked about it.
I mean, the dude hasn't had a turnover yet. He's been
I
extremely
didn't even know that.
consistent. Yeah. He's got 12 points against the Clippers, which is kind of crazy considering nobody else got that high. Oh, Devin had 14, so he was the second highest scorer off the bench in 17 minutes. Hit both of his free throws. Had 14 points against the Rockets, +9, 4 for 6 from 3. Like, he just provides an energy and a consistency that nobody else has yet to show.
He really brings in a stability
Mhm.
regardless of which lineup he's in. And I think that's why you see him in there. That's why you see that Shetty. You just see him in there with the starters. I could list all the different types of rotations, but he's in there with Devin and Keldon a lot.
Mhm. I mean, it works. He has been a blessing in disguise. We literally got him for free. He was a salary dump to us, and he's going to prove to be probably the most valuable bench guy next to Trey.
Yeah.
And I think somebody we've actually forgot to mention, this will be brief, Malachi, because
No,
he was the
please.
guy that we thought, it's only been 3 games. Like, we got to keep reiterating that.
Right.
But I kind of expected him to be a little bit more explosive than he has been. He had 9 points against the Rockets and 9 points against the Clippers, but an inefficient 9 points against the Clippers, 3
Yeah.
for 12, 2 for 4 from 3. I don't know what it is about Malachi. Maybe he needs to be a little more selfish, and maybe it just comes down to that confusion thing, like you have continued to say. Maybe he just doesn't know where he fits in right now.
Here's my thing, and this ties into the point guard discussion, which everybody wants to talk about. I'm seeing a lot of the same issues on the bench. And I know the talent level's not as high, but we just talked about Shetty, and
Mhm.
Malachi. Like I'm not seeing we're just it's like we're going so fast trying to move in transition, and I love Trey driving to the basket, and I've praised his scoring in
Mhm.
transition, driving to the basket, and how he can finish in up and unders and have acrobatic finishes. I like that, but not every time we have the ball, and that hasn't been. I'm not literally saying every time the bench has gotten the ball we've ran in transition, but what I'm saying is that I really can't think of too many plays like set up for Malachi. There was the three against the Rockets. I saw an assist from Trey, but that was really like kind of also it was like a broken play kind of where he got it back and it was
Oh,
a good
yep, I remember
assist.
that.
But you know what I'm talking about. That was the first three of the game. Like we don't really have like any sets like as much on our bench either. So and that ties into probably once again the Wembenyama thing.
Mhm.
Um, but it's just I'm glad you brought that up because it's tough. It's tough to see that happening on both sides. And I completely agree that in the Rockets game, when Trey was with the starting unit, that he was able to showcase a lot of his playmaking. So that may be the case, the little bit of talent, but I think it's less of that. I think it's just we weren't running as much structure, off the
Mhm.
bench. Um, when he's in there with Malachi. Because when I thought of this bench unit coming into the season, when we were talking about this all summer about Jeremy potentially being in the starting lineup, I was excited about this backcourt and Trey
Mhm.
setting Malachi up. Um, and I'm not saying this is all on Trey. I think this is a whole kind of
Yeah.
scheme thing, but I am a little bit, I would like to see more of that. I would like to see more of our second unit, running stuff. But it's it's tough to evaluate because I'm not sure like what they're telling Trey to do. Because if they're telling Trey to push it, it's like you can't get mad at him for following instructions. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Especially when he is one of the better scorers off the bench. But at the same time, if he's doing that of his own accord, we probably should be setting things up more. So the whole reason I bring that up, Ethan, is one, because we would like to see Malachi get the ball more, but two, because that would make our bench unit better if we could have him and Shetty scoring consistently. But the other thing is, like when you talk about all of these, we're talking about all these solutions, and everybody's just like, if you just play a point guard, it's gonna fix everything. I'm seeing some of the same issues that we have on with the starters with with the bench. And
Mhm.
like I said earlier, that's not me saying that I think Jeremy's better at playmaking than Trey. That's just me saying that I think that the issues that are persisting here are greater than just we need a traditional point guard in the lineup. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I will say once again, holistically, 0 half-court offense right now. We fix that, I think we fix a lot of these problems.
I agree. I agree. Well, Ethan, do you think through these three games that we've what do you think of us defensively other than the Clippers game?
I think physically we have the tools to be very good. Finally, I don't think there's like other than Zach's interior against guys like Jokic and Nurkic and whatever. I think we've finally closed some of those gaps. At this point, it's just going to be a mental thing and chemistry.
Yeah. We'll have to see. I know it's been disappointing, but if you look at that Rockets game, there were a lot of stops down the stretch. Obviously, of course,
Hmm.
Wembenyama swatting Jabari Smith twice is the first
Huge.
thing that comes to mind. But it wasn't just him. If you go back
Hmm.
and watch that game like I did today, there were some other key stops from guys as well. Trey forced a miss from Fred Van Vliet. Fred Van Vliet also got him. Jeremy Sohan first forced an air ball from Fred Van Vliet down the stretch, and then got a dunk. I think he actually got subbed out the next play because Jabari Smith went right past him. Um, but I agree with you. I think that as much as people may not feel like it right now, I think we do have the pieces. I just really I think the main thing we've gotten from this conversation, Ethan, is that it's all mental.
Couldn't have said it better.
Yeah. All right, guys, we appreciate you hanging out with us and debriefing with us here today. Be sure to follow us on Twitter to stay updated with all SSPN stuff at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. Don't forget to hit that like and that subscribe button if you enjoyed the content, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. See y'all later. Go Spurs, go.